Hi, you probably don't care about it, but I'm recording this lecture now for the third time. For some reason my computer crashes, not the computer, the program, Camtasia program that I use to record this lecture crashes a few seconds or minutes before the lecture is over, and I cannot find a way to recover the lecture. So let's do it one more time. Hopefully this time it will work. I'll probably save the lecture in shorter files that I will then merge together later on. Anyway, Chapter 8, Regional Economic Integration. So today I'm going to talk about the consequences and the reasons for countries to become closer integrated economically. It can be small or little integration, such as free trade zone, or it can be integration all the way to becoming one country. Obviously the effects would be pretty much the same in all these cases, with the exception that the closer you integrate, the stronger the effect will be. Since this is the last lecture in the series of lectures in international trade, I'll also have some concluding remarks on the effects of international trade, as well as on what America can and maybe even should do to make sure that it retains its leading role in the international arena in this globalized era. This is a very controversial topic, and normally I start my lecture with a series of experiments when I teach this class in a face-to-face setting. I'll give you a couple of examples just to, give you a sense of what I normally do. You'll have to believe me when I tell you what the outcomes of these experiments are, and hopefully, even though you're not participating in them directly, hopefully the results of this discussion will open up your mind and will help you better understand some of the concepts that I will be discussing in this lecture. Normally I start this lecture with an experiment where I give my students a few simple and short questions. The question basically, or the main question reads like the following. Imagine that the United States and Mexico became one country. What would be the outcomes of such a union? And students would have to answer or choose an option: A, both benefit; B, both lose; C, A benefits and B loses. In other words, Mexico benefits and the United States loses; and D, the United States wins and Mexico loses. Now, there are a couple more clarifying questions, like the extent of loss or gain for each of these countries. And there is one important caveat to this experiment. This same question is asked in three different versions. I split my class randomly into three conditions, and so condition 1, where about 1/3 of the class received the question about Mexico and the United States, and so they have to predict the economic consequences of these two countries becoming one. Now, condition B, another third of my students receive exactly the same question, but it pertains to Japan and China becoming one country. So what would be the outcome of Japan and China becoming one country? How would that impact each of the members? So would both of them lose, both of them win, or one lose, one win, and so on. And then in the third condition, the last 1/3 of my class, they received the same question with Germany and Russia as the two countries. Now, I give students a few minutes to answer those questions, and then we use iClickers, and so they share their answers with me, and I fill their answers into this table. And inevitably and I always get the same results, and I've done it, I don't know, at least 10 times, so with a few thousand students total. And at least 2,000 students have participated in this activity. The result that I always see is this. The students who are asked about the outcomes or consequences of USA and Mexico becoming one country are predictably negative. So they always say that it would be a horrible idea to make the two countries one. They usually think that it will be a loss, a definite loss for the United States, and probably a loss for Mexico, and overall they completely don't support the idea. I normally have at least a few students from Mexico in my class, and they too think that such a union would be a terrible idea. They believe that Mexico probably will lose big time, the United States will likely lose too, and they wouldn't support such an idea. Now, and this is where the interesting stuff begins. The students who received the questions about Japan and China and Germany and Russia all predictably and pretty much unanimously believe that such unions would be a very good idea, that both countries, Japan and China, or Germany and Russia, would benefit big time, and some even share that if China, for example, and Japan were to become one country, such a union would be a great thing and probably will catapult the new union, the two countries, into the first place in the global arena. Japan being basically the world rising power of the 80s and 90s, and China being the rising power of today. If those two could put together the resources and technology, that surely would make them number one sooner or later. The same can be said about Germany, again, with the German technology, Russian resources, absolutely wonderful idea. Now it becomes even more interesting when I have students from Japan, China, Germany, and Russia in my class, and I normally have several Chinese students, at least one student from Russia, at least one student from Germany, and occasionally some students from Japan. And even though the sample seems small over the semesters I've been teaching this course, the numbers are actually fairly large. And what I see there is that students, for example, from China, believe that it's a horrible idea to make one country out of China and Japan, but they still think that, for example, Germany and Russia would make a wonderful union. They tend to also think that Mexico and the United States would also make a wonderful union. The same thing is true about Germans and Russians and so on and so on. What this experiment shows is that people tend to be NIMBY. If you know what NIMBY is, not in my backyard. You know that expression, right? So when they talk about their own country, they tend to be very defensive and protective. People tend to prefer a fence around their backyard, and they don't want to deal with anyone else. However, when they look at potential integration of people not in their backyard, all of a sudden they recognize all kinds of benefits. And if you look at these three country pairs, Japan, China, Germany, Russia, USA, Mexico, you would see that the three are very similar. One country is larger in population, one is much more developed economically, so there are really no substantive differences in terms of economies of, Germany to Russia is like Japan to China, is like USA to Mexico. And so the only difference that determines those hugely positive or hugely negative responses are where the person is from. Now, this is not to say that somebody is not smart enough. This is our somehow human propensity. We have all those sayings in different languages, including in English, that the fence, the quality or size of the fence between the neighbors is proportional to the friendship between the neighbors. The taller the fence, the more friendlier the neighbors are. And so people somehow tend to prefer, this is me and this is not me. And that same principle applies to the international integration. So when I will be talking about things today, about regional integration, please keep in mind that you are prejudiced against integration of your own country. And that means several things. First, you may become close-minded and overly emotional when you think about integration of the United States with, for example, Mexico or Canada. This is normal. This is exactly how the Chinese, Russians, Germans, Ukrainians perceive the same issue when they talk about their own country. Second, if you want to give good answers to your take-home assignment, and the take-home assignment will be to predict consequences of Canada and the United States becoming one country. So when you will be answering those questions, I recommend that you don't think about the United States and Canada. I recommend that you think about, for example, China and Japan, or Germany and Russia. By taking your own country out of the context, you will move the center of thinking from here, from your emotions, from your heart, to here, your brain. Somehow we just can't think logically when we think about our own country. And by the way, if you were to talk about Japan and China, well, they had terrible wars, and the same thing obviously true about Germany and Russia. Now ask me about integration of, for example, Russia and Ukraine, and even though I would say Japan, China, Germany, Russia, USA, Mexico would be a wonderful idea, there is no way I can support integration of Ukraine with Russia, for example. And probably because I'm just like you, am biased in, as long as it's about my own backyard. Now, alternatively, and that's also an advice for your take-home assignment, you might want to um, approach it from the opposite end. Rather than thinking what would happen if Canada and the United States became one country, think about what would happen if North Carolina became an independent country. And so whatever your answers to those take-home assignment questions would be, like for example, how that would affect wages in North Carolina, employment in North Carolina, all those kinds of things in North Carolina, whatever your answers would be, it's pretty much safe to just flip them over, reverse the answers, and those would be your correct answers to your question about the economic consequences of Canada and the United States becoming one country. I'll get back to the take-home assignment a few more times, but again, keep the main question in mind. The two countries become one president, one currency, one parliament. How will that impact prices, wages, unemployment, and everything else in both countries? Now, talking about regional integration, you hopefully recognize that there are different levels of integration. You can just become, for example, a free trade area. The two countries remain completely separate, but the products are allowed to cross the border without any import tariffs or any other barriers. And then obviously you can go as far as custom union, a common market, economic union, all the way to political union, where you have basically one single country. The United States would be a wonderful example of a political union. You have 50 states, and even though each state retains some form of governance, of local governments, but obviously all 50 form one political union, which is the United States. Now, here is a typical question that you would see on the exam, and so here I have basically three questions. Which one of these is the European Union, which one is NAFTA, and which one is the United States? I hope you can answer this question, but if not, read the book or listen to me, and so here are the answers. So the European Union is an economic union. If you go to the previous slide, you would see the definition, and so that's basically an economic union is almost like one country, but still without any political unification. NAFTA would be a free trade zone, so the products move freely across the border, but there are really no other attributes of unification, though it's getting really close to the custom union. So products that enter Mexico can now enter the United States without any substantial barriers, though it's not quite without any barriers yet. And then the United States obviously is a political union. So I guarantee you that there will be at least one question of this type on the exam, and you would need to, I will give you some kind of entity, and you would need to decide which form of integration that is. Now we're going to talk about different forms of or different consequences of regional integration, and I will talk about each of them in the subsequent slides. Here is just a summary of what it does good and what it does, or what positive and what negative consequences it gives. So first, obviously, trade creation. If you believe that trade is good, then regional integration is good. Now remember, we talked about in the international context, countries are like people, not like companies. Companies, as we said, are fighting for external customers. People, on the other hand, they cooperate. They exchange favors and products. You scratch my back, I scratch your back, and we are both better off this way. So we're not competing for somebody else's attention. You help me, I help you. That's exactly what countries do. You give me your oranges, I give you my cars, and so as a result we all benefit from this trade. So exchange presumably is voluntary, right? So for example, the reason you're buying some products from China is not because somebody is forcing you to buy those products, but because you come to the store, you look at the prices, you look at the products, you compare the qualities, you compare the prices, and you decide that this is the product for me, and oops, it's made in China. And yes, it doesn't sound patriotic, but you did your homework, and this is what you chose for yourself. And so probably this is what's best for you. Now, again, it may seem like it's a bad thing because you got something from China, but then what about the trade deficit? Well, the reality is that the only reason China gives you some products is because they want something back from you. And so sooner or later they will come and buy some product from you. I mean, if they want, that's beautiful because you got something for free from them and they're not asking for anything back. The truth is that sooner or later they will ask for something back, and this is basically what we call exchange. So people are not concerned about us taking something from China. They're concerned that, there must be trade. And again, the only reason we give something to others is because we expect something back. And so this time China may be holding your money that you already paid for their product. Sooner or later they will buy something with that money. By the way, between us, the longer they wait, the better off you are. And the more the probability is that for that money they will get less in exchange, so you'll have to work less for them. So if anything, the trade deficit in the long run is likely to benefit America more than it benefits China. Now, the more you trade, I guess, the better off everybody is, the more specialized you become, and so this part of international integration is almost indisputable. Why would people trade more? Well, because you have all those restrictions falling. So there were fences, real or virtual or both, between the nations. Now there are none. So there are no delays on the border. Products move fast. You basically make it easier to trade, and as a result, there is more trade. More importantly, as the countries integrate, competition basically becomes tougher. So you have all of a sudden not only more customers, but you also have more companies competing for those customers. And what normally happens is that through the process of natural selection, companies that are not competitive enough go out of business, and their place is taken by the companies that are more efficient. And again, if you believe in competition, and to my understanding that's what America is built upon, then this is a good thing. So as a result, customers get better products faster, more efficiently, and at a lower price. Just like, for example, if North Carolina were to become a separate state, you understand that trade with, for example, California would become, or Florida would become more difficult. So you would have to pay much more for oranges. You would have a much more difficult time selling your furniture and whatever else you make here in North Carolina, tobacco. And so as a result, prices for you will increase. It will take longer. It will be more expensive to make things. Whereas if North Carolina is part of the United States, North Carolina can easily buy those products from other states, sell something in exchange. Moreover, since North Carolina is very good at making, for example, furniture, North Carolina can make more of those same chairs, and so marginal cost decreases as you increase the volume. And so not only the price is cheaper because it's easier to move the products, but also because you make more of the same product, and so each next unit becomes cheaper. The same applies to, for example, Florida and California making oranges for you. The more they grow for the entire country, the cheaper it is to grow one next unit, and so you, as a North Carolinian, receive those products cheaper. So everybody seems to benefit here. Now, a couple of interesting stories related to this theme, regional integration. Obviously, one of the concerns is that as countries integrate, labor moves, and so labor resources, people from poor countries, come to rich countries and take the jobs. And so this concern obviously is present in the United States. Many Americans are concerned about Mexicans coming and taking the jobs, or Latin Americans in general coming and taking the jobs. But exactly the same concerns exist in the European Union and just about any other region of the world. In the European Union, for example, there was a very interesting story in 2004 when it became known that one of the high-rank officials in France was hiring plumbers, or one plumber from Poland. In France being even more nationalistic and patriotic than the United States, many people there felt that it was not something that a political official is allowed to do, even though there are no laws that prohibit you from hiring individuals from another country who are working in the country illegally. But again, many people in France felt that it was not patriotic enough. And now one of the reporters asked that official what he can say about it, and the guy said, well, I don't see a problem with that. The Polish plumber can do the job equally well and offers me a better price, so if anything I save 20-30 euros here and there, why not? It makes economic sense to me. Obviously the French public were outraged, but this brings us to basically the trade-off. So let's talk about the United States and Mexico, and let's assume that there is cheap Mexican labor moving into the United States as a result of the two countries being closer integrated. what happens is that somebody loses and somebody gains. And so who loses? Obviously those people who now have to compete with more competition. So for example, plumbers or lawn mowers or whatever else people from Mexico can do. I suppose there are some engineers, probably some doctors, more people in construction and agriculture. So those Americans who had jobs in those industries, obviously they lose. You were making a good living, and all of a sudden there is a guy from Mexico who comes and says, I can do the job for less. So for you, that's more competition. You either have to become much better than him and continue charging your high premium, or you have to go out of business. Now, who wins is the consumer. So consumers, you, me, especially you, would like to save some money. And so if somebody offers you a service or a product for less, that's a good thing for you. Every time you save $1, that's $1 that you can spend on another product. Now, every dollar that you can spend on another product is basically a dollar that can go and create demand for another job in America. So who also benefits are people whose service you can now buy, because you have higher savings and you have more disposable money, and you can basically create that demand. So somebody always wins, somebody always loses. And so who said that American consumers or American workers in industries that now have higher demand because of cheaper products or labor from Mexico, who said that those people are less important than the people who lose jobs due to tougher competition from Mexico? So, but anyway, I'm not here to judge who's right and who's wrong. I'm just saying that there are definite winners and there are definite losers, and both groups are equally important to American success. So not only those who lose, but also those who win. Now, talking, by the way, about the Polish plumber, Poland decided to capitalize on this publicity, and so they posted posters like this one all around the country, all around the European Union, trying to invite tourists to Poland. And so the number here, the text here says that basically coming numbers to Poland and vacation in Poland. There is a larger story on Wikipedia about the Polish plumber scandal, and again, you can easily see parallels between the concerns that the old, rich European countries have in the light of the European Union expansion and addition of some poorer countries, and what America experiences with Mexico at this time. Now, trade creation is good, but regional integration, surprisingly, can also lead to trade diversion. And I recommend that you understand how it works, because there will be likely a question on the exam about this. Imagine a situation where you have three countries. I have my primitive drawing here. So we have the United States, we have Mexico, and we have Japan. Imagine that there is no union, no integration among these countries. And so the United States trades with Mexico, and the United States trades with Japan. Now, imagine that one day America and Mexico decide to sign this NAFTA agreement, and all of a sudden trading with Mexico for the United States becomes much easier. No import tariffs, no paperwork on the border, you just go. This doesn't make trade with Japan less interesting. What it does, it makes trade with Japan less interesting compared to trade with Mexico. And so what can happen is that trade with Japan kind of gets diverted. You can buy stuff much more efficiently from Mexico, and so Japan, not being a member of the club, all of a sudden is kind of left out. And so the problem is that while the trade with Mexico is likely to increase, or Canada, or whatever other country you form a club with, countries that are not members of the club all of a sudden become kind of outside, and so the trade with those countries gets diverted. And so overall, it may not be a huge deal, because trade with, or loss in trade with those countries that are not members of the trade union gets replaced with more trade with the members of the union. But what if, like for example, Japan or Germany or Ukraine have something unique to offer to your country that cannot be fully replaced by the countries or what the countries in the club can offer to you? And so that trade diversion sometimes may be perceived as a loss. Now, here's a question for you to make sure that you understand what trade diversion is. And obviously the answer is, it is a reduction in trade between the union members, countries in the union like NAFTA, and non-union members, countries outside the union, like for example Japan in this case. Now, job relocation is a big concern, obviously, when you talk about international integration. And again, as we said, there are two trends here, or two consequences. The negative, obviously, is the loss of jobs by the people who now have tougher competition, and competition from other countries, maybe lower labor, maybe higher technology. But then advantage, obviously, is lower prices for the consumers. Lower prices mean more savings mean more demand, which means more jobs. Now, I have obviously Mexico and the United States context here, and it may seem like jobs are relocated only from the United States to Mexico, and it seems like it's a loss for the United States. But again, don't forget that America sends a lot of stuff to Mexico, mainly high-tech things, but all kinds of things, from financial services to all kinds of stuff. And so obviously America having better technology as well as more experience with, for example, service provision, tends to beat Mexico in those specific areas. And so again, much of those kinds of jobs have been relocated to the United States. So the United States now does kind of twice as much as of work both for the United States and for Mexico. And so unfortunately or luckily, those jobs are primarily service jobs that go from Mexico to the United States. And they're not as visible as what we see here on the picture, but again, the trend may be both ways. And as I will be talking many times, here in rich countries like the United States, the concern is that the poor countries will steal all the jobs because they have lower labor costs. Well, the concern in poor countries like, for example, Mexico, is that with your bigger capital, better technology, better developed bureaucratic systems, you can make things more efficiently, faster with your robots and technology. And basically you can buy out all the companies there in the poor country. And so the concerns are both ways. And so as I said, somebody definitely loses, but most definitely somebody also wins in both countries. I'll give you a specific example of how sometimes people see A but don't see B. And so this one goes to Canada. Prior to NAFTA, Canada had small but viable and successful film industry. Canadians were making movies much like what Hollywood does today. Obviously not on the same scale, but they were making movies from the beginning till the end, from casting the actors all the way to production. Now, with NAFTA in place, it became not so interesting for the Canadian studios to stay in Canada. Since moving their services and films across the border is no longer an issue, most Canadian studios chose to relocate to Hollywood because this is where the production cluster is, this is where the expertise is. And so many Canadians are complaining about NAFTA because of that seemingly negative outcome. We had movie industry and now we don't. What many people don't see is actually today Canada has many more jobs in the film sector than it did before NAFTA. What happened is that yes, most of the studios literally relocated to Canada. Canadian actors now pretty much all live in the United States. Jim Carrey, Mike Myers, there are all those young actors now that star in all those teenager comedies. I don't know their names, but you know, those guys from Juno and those guys from Superbad and so on. I don't know their names, but all of them are from Canada, or most of them are from Canada. So yes, those kind of jobs have been lost to Americans. What also happened is that since not only Canadians now can do their business in America, but so can Americans do their business in Canada. And so a huge number of films are these days filmed in Canada because first, Canada has more favorable tax system, especially in the movie industry, but also because, you know, it's just easy. And so for the scenery, for example, sometimes you can just go to Canada because, you know, that's exactly the scenery you need. And so a number of movies have been filmed in Canada in the last several years. In fact, I've seen numbers that 1,500 films and television productions have been made in Canada by Hollywood studios in the last 5 years. And so they include like X-Men, Silent Hill, Resident Evil, The Pacifier, The Day After Tomorrow, Brokeback Mountain, and many more. By the way, Brokeback Mountain, I was actually in Calgary at the time when the movie was filmed, and I even had a chance to see a couple of scenes being filmed. But anyway, not the ones that you're laughing at. So what happened was that there was some specialization going on, and so even though Canadian actors now live in the United States, but certain parts of the movie production cycle are now done almost exclusively in Canada. For example, Canadian studios now specialize in special effects and computer graphics. Like for example, X-Men most of that fancy graphics was actually made in Vancouver, done in Vancouver. And so, yes, actor jobs have been lost, but then many more jobs have been created in those other niche kind of segments of the movie production cycle. And as a result, Canada now makes much more money on movie making than it used to make while Canada has had its own film industry. So obviously, again, these things are harder to see now, but they are real. And again, if you're concerned about jobs, you can probably see similar trends in just about any other industry. Now let's look at some stats. NAFTA and jobs. So point one, there are some organizations and researchers who claim that about 1 million jobs have been lost in the United States due to NAFTA. There are also about a number of researchers and economists who say that about 1 million jobs have been created due to NAFTA. It is my obligation to show you both perspectives, but I would like to emphasize that the two perspectives are not quite the same. It is very similar to what you see in the debate on global warming. Yes, it is true that some people believe that global warming is real and caused by humans. It is also true that some people believe that global warming is fake and human activity has nothing to do with it. But the truth is that even though there seem to be two camps, and when you see reports on the news and they interview a guy who believes A and a guy who believes B, what usually is not shown is that the number of scientists who believe that global warming, have evidence, empirical evidence that global warming is real, is roughly 99.9%, and those who say otherwise are virtually non-existent, at least in peer-reviewed academic publications. Exactly the same thing is true about the consequences of NAFTA for American labor and employment. It is true that occasionally you can see some economists saying that NAFTA cost America jobs. But if you, for example, go to Google Scholar and search for NAFTA and jobs and read the first 100 studies that you find, about 99 of those 100 studies will actually say that NAFTA had a positive impact on job creation in the United States. It might have led to job losses in certain industries, but overall, it actually was a very positive and job creating process. So yes, there are two camps, but everyone who studies this, not everyone, 99% of those who studied this topic, economists who look at the data, believe that NAFTA created jobs in the United States as well as in Mexico. And there are only a few researchers who think otherwise. And those who think otherwise tend to be what I would call lobby groups, but most people for some reason call them think tanks. On the other hand, some of them are actually respected organizations, so I guess we shouldn't just discount what they say. But anyway, these are some of the stats. One of the factors, or one of the numbers that nobody seems to dispute, is that there are millions of jobs in the United States that create goods and services for the other members of NAFTA, Canada and Mexico. I've seen different numbers. 3 million to 5.5 million jobs in the United States created to provide services and goods for the other two countries. The difference in the estimates seems to be that it is not clear what jobs you should include in that category. Clearly, those who make products that go to Mexico, for example, are in that category. But would people who, for example, move those products to Mexico, should they be counted or not? Or people who do accounting related to production and shipment of those products, should they be counted? But even if you look at purely just the people who sit here and make products that now are exported to Mexico and Canada, that's still millions of people working here. So that question is clear. What is not clear sometimes is that, well, would there be more jobs if there was no NAFTA than those 3 million or not? And so I guess that's where the controversy arises. And so there are estimates from -1 million to +1 million. And as I said, most economists believe that actually it was still a positive effect on job creation in the United States. There are also some other seemingly controversial facts. For example, we know that since the United States and Mexico and Canada formed NAFTA, since then, exports from the United States to Mexico have more than doubled. So today, America sells to Mexico twice as many products and services than it did before NAFTA was established. It is also true that Mexico now sells 3 times as much to the United States than it did before NAFTA. Now, here is the kind of question: is it good or is it bad? Some people see that as a bad trend because it seems like Mexico is gaining so much more than we are. Others say, well, it's not a problem at all. It's almost like if you found $10 and I found $20. Do you gain or do you lose? Well, obviously, some people would say it's a good thing because you found $10, you didn't have it, now you do. Others would say, well, he found so much more, so maybe you lost. Well, the point here is that your gain is not my loss, or just the fact that I found even more, it's not your loss. It's just, you found a little less. And so that's exactly the same with NAFTA. We were able to sell and make more and sell it to Mexico, and just because they now benefit even more doesn't mean that we are losing. So at least that's how many economists see it. By the way, similar trends with Canada. Also, imports to Canada, or exports from the United States to Canada, have increased dramatically, approximately doubled, but then products from Canada into the United States, mainly energy and natural resources, but obviously many other products as well, have more than tripled. And so again, is it good for America or bad? Well, most would say that Canada seems to be winning, but at the same time, it's not that America is losing, it's America winning a lot, but Canada winning even more. So that's how I would see it. Now, the irony of NAFTA is that in all 3 countries it's equally hated, and I believe I used this slide before, and let me show it again to you. In Canada, people are generally against NAFTA, or at least a huge portion of people are against NAFTA. The same thing obviously is in the United States, and the same thing is obviously in Mexico. Each of the 3 countries claims that the other 2 are reaping all the benefits. Canadians believe that America and Mexico are stealing their natural resources. Americans are worried that their jobs are stolen because of Mexico and Canada. Mexicans believe that Canada and the United States are buying them out and making them permanent, I don't know, almost like slaves, because they will buy our companies and will work for them for the rest of our days. Well, if each of the parties claims that the other 2 benefit and I'm the one who's losing, obviously this argument is logically incoherent, because it's impossible. And so the truth likely is that all 3 countries benefit, but then obviously there are some segments of the people in each of the 3 countries who lose, and so those tend to be much more vocal, and so as a result the public is a little misinformed about the consequences of such a union, and as a result we hear only about the negatives but hardly ever hear about the positives, which may create an impression that we are losing and the other ones are winning. So I believe that's the principle that many people here call the grass is always greener on the other side. And so many studies in psychology have shown that this is how humans tend to perceive comparative benefits, you versus me, and it's definitely the case with regional integration. Here's your next question. And the correct answer is all are true. So the correct answer is E. So all those claims are true, and I believe it's a somewhat poorly worded question because we have double negatives here. But yes, all these claims are correct. Now, let me review, and this is probably the most important slide for your take-home assignment. Let me review what we definitely know about regional integration. Most of these claims are not purely logical, are based on solid logic, and then pretty much every study that looked into these claims have found strong empirical support for these claims. So first, what we know is when countries integrate, become closer, trade becomes easier. Obviously, trading becomes easier between the countries, and as a result, the volume of trade increases. So I sell more to you and you sell more to me. The only thing is when people say sell, it kind of sounds like, I sold and I keep the money. No, selling means exchanging. So we exchange more goods because, nobody wants the pieces of paper. What we want is what you can buy with them. And so what you can buy is your product or my product. And so money just facilitates the exchange. So trade is nothing but exchange, not really purchase, but it is an exchange of products and services between, in this case, countries. So we know that. So trade volume increases because it is easier. We also know that regional integration increases competition. there are not only more customers that the companies have access to, but there are also more companies competing, and so there is more competition. Now again, if you're a true American, you probably believe in competition. This is what this country is built upon. Competition is good. Competition drives prices down as the companies are trying to compete for the customer, usually by forcing companies to innovate, to become more efficient, to become more, lean and mean. Improve productivity and improve often quality. And so competition does all that. By doing so, it also benefits the consumers, obviously. Less competitive companies go out of business, which may be perceived as a negative, obviously, for the companies that didn't survive, or as a positive. I mean, if they couldn't compete, maybe they should have not been here in the first place. But good or bad, we know that this is what's happening. So more competition, lower prices, more efficiency, higher volume, better quality, and then less competitive, less adapted companies going out of business. We also know that regional integration leads to specialization. If there is a company in this country that can do this product much better than the equivalent company in this country, then chances are this company will grow and specialize in this product and will serve both countries, and this one will go out of business. And then if there is a company in this country that does something better than its equivalent in that country, either because they have better technology or climate here is more suited for making that product, they will specialize in that product and sell it for the whole territory. So specialization obviously leads to increased volume and economies of scale. So in other words, marginal cost will be lower. So if you have to make a huge number of product A now for a larger market, obviously the price of that product A, next unit of that product A, will be lower. And so obviously consumers will benefit from lower prices, companies will make somewhat more profits, hopefully will invest those profits in more innovation, better research and development, and so everyone seems to benefit from specialization. Now, less competitive companies will vanish, and again, you may see that as a negative if you work for one of those companies, or as a positive, because, I mean, the reason they vanish is because consumers voted with their dollars for somebody else, and so somebody else now grows to replace that loss. Labor moves from less promising to more promising areas. So basically labor moves to where the demand for labor is higher. And again, many people would see that as a negative because, you know, if you are in, let's say, housing market and labor moves from your region, you obviously lose. But if you need labor to make a wonderful new invention, new product, you benefit because you have more people to attract to take your jobs. Not your jobs, jobs that you created. So to sum up, with regional integration, you definitely have winners and losers. And in primitive terms, winners would be the companies that can make better products for less, for better price. Obviously, those companies, their employees, their owners, as well as customers in general. Competition, economies of scale always benefit the customers. Losers would be less effective, less innovative companies that cannot compete, and obviously it would be their employers and their employees. Their owners and their employees. And so, depending on where you stand, is how you perceive it. So, if you work for a company that is a good company, you will definitely be happy about integration. If you work for a company that is not a good company as far as not able to compete, then you would not be happy about the development, and because you would be losing. Another big concern is national sovereignty. People are paranoid and afraid of losing their freedom. When you are a country, even if you're a small country, you make most of your decisions on your own. You decide what you do, when you do it, how you do it. Not quite the same, but that's the basic idea. As you become a member of a larger union, like for example European Union, or maybe some form of NAFTA or another type of organization, obviously you need to yield some of your sovereignty to the supranational, like European Parliament or another type of governing body. And so many people are not happy about that. They feel that maybe those larger organizations will be making decisions not in their favor. The concern is particularly acute in smaller countries that feel that, let's say for example, a small country decides to integrate with the United States. Obviously the United States, being so big and powerful, will simply swallow, and the small country will dissolve in the larger country, and so they not only will lose their identity but also basically all their autonomy. And again, true or false, the truth is that this is a persistent concern, and many people are worried about that. Even going and, for example, one of the answers that I frequently see on the take-home assignment, and by the way, that's a bad answer, so don't give me that answer now. But one thing that I see is that, for example, American students here say that, oh, it would be bad because our healthcare will become socialist. Well, first of all, integration doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take what the other one has. So if yours is better, then maybe they will adopt your system, not you adopt theirs. And in fact, integration is one of those rare opportunities when you can make big changes, because you need to standardize systems in some way, and so you have all of a sudden choice of several, and so you basically just do some research and see which one works best and maybe adopt that one, or maybe even stick with what you have. Just like, for example, American states, not every state has the same policies and the same laws, and it seems to work fairly well. And by the way, talking about Canadian healthcare, if you really want to know which one is better, well, look at the measurable outcomes of healthcare. And so those would be life expectancy, infant mortality, epidemics rate. So basically, who lives longer, who gets sick more often, who gets well sooner, and all those things. And Canada, unfortunately, luckily, I don't know, definitely does much better than the United States. They live longer, they get sick less. When they get sick, they get better sooner. And the funniest part is, or not, actually it's not funny, the kind of interesting part is that they spend only about 45% per capita of what Americans spend on healthcare. So their system seems to be much, much better, much effective, I guess, and much cheaper. But anyway, that's not about healthcare. It's just something that, if the two countries were to integrate, it would be interesting to take a look at, what each country has to offer and take what works best. Maybe the United States has something that works better than what they have in Canada, and perhaps they should adopt some of the parts. But anyway, in Canada, definitely the concern would be that America being so big will basically make Canada the 51st state, and so for them the concern of national sovereignty or loss of such would be obviously a big deal. But even in the United States, people would be concerned about that. NAFTA and the Mexico case, I'm going to skip through these slides. What I'm going to say here is that the biggest concern seems to be when a poor and a rich country are integrating together. If, for example, I told that the United States and Germany were to make some form of a union, probably most Americans would be okay with that. They may not be very happy about it because they would be concerned perhaps that, I don't know, German Volkswagen, Mercedes, and BMW will, I don't know, put the big three out of business, or whatever else whatever else concerns people can come up with. I'm sure there would be many, but generally the general public would be okay with that. The concerns arise when we talk about integration of countries that are at different levels of development. The problem obviously is that in the rich country, people would be concerned about people from the poor countries coming and taking the jobs for less, and so that's a valid concern, at least for the people whose jobs are taken. In the poor countries, equally the concern is that the rich country will come with its money and its better technology and in a sense occupy the country or buy everything and own everything, and so the locals will have no other choice but to basically work for the new rich power for the rest of their lives. In Ukraine, for example, country of my origin, it is a persistent debate whether Ukraine should be a full member of the European Union or if it should form some form of a new USSR with Russia. And the belief in Ukraine is that if Ukraine were to become a full member of the European Union, then the richer, more developed European countries will take advantage of Ukraine, will buy all the lucrative companies, and Ukraine will be left with nothing. Obviously, in Europe, the concern is the opposite, just like it is in the United States, that Ukrainians, with their fairly educated but cheap labor, will come and take all the jobs, and some Europeans will lose all their jobs. And again, you'll be the judge which one is correct, but again, the point here is that both cannot be truly true, right? So, but now talking about Mexico and the United States, I have some numbers here just to discuss what Americans gain and what Americans lose. What Americans lose is obvious. I mean, Mexicans come and being willing to work, willing to work for less, may steal American jobs, and we kind of see this process, and it is widely publicized and in fact overblown big time. What people don't see, what people also see is that Mexico sells more to the United States than the United States sells to Mexico, and there is a trade deficit of about $60 billion a year, and many people also see that as a problem. What people don't see is that first, there are many Americans who have jobs because now America sells more to Mexico, and those jobs wouldn't be here otherwise. Also, what people don't see is those cheaper imports from Mexico save a lot of money for Americans. The estimates are that about $75 billion are saved by Americans every year due to cheaper agricultural produce, cheaper cars from Mexico, and whatever else America buys from Mexico. Like Chevy Silverado is about $5,000 cheaper if it's made in Mexico, and it is a huge saving. I mean, thousands of those are sold every year, and that's a lot of money left in your pockets. And when that money is left in your pockets, that's the money that you have and can spend on other products and create jobs in other sectors. So, for example, $75 billion at $50,000 a year, that's 1.5 million jobs created just because you now have more money to spend on those jobs. Also, what many people don't recognize is that American companies make a lot more money because now they can make their products in Mexico. So, and again, different estimates show that roughly $25 billion extra are made by American companies in profits due to cheaper production cost in Mexico. And again, who said that blue-collar workers in somewhere in the Rust Belt are more important than company owners in that same region? I mean, companies, not only big three, but also smaller companies that make or buy components from Mexican factories are making more money, and so they also win, not only the consumers, but also the those employees as well as owners of those companies. Now, one very important thing is that many people don't see is that access to cheap Mexican labor is important, essential to survival of many American companies. As you probably know, 3 years ago, Chrysler and GM went through the bankruptcy process, and Ford was very close to getting there. Now, all three companies have factories in Mexico. They were really close to getting basically to going out of business, and many people say that the only reason the three companies could survive is because they have access to the cheap labor in Mexico and in China. Had they not had that option, they would definitely be out of business. I mean, they just wouldn't be able to compete on the global arena. Remember that all three companies, American companies as well as it's also true about German companies, Japanese companies, all of them save a lot of money by tapping this cheap labor pool. And if you were not to allow your companies to do it, or if there was no easy way for them to do it, they would be just not competitive in the global arena because other companies have that option. And so the question becomes, is it better to have GM that has factories in Mexico than to have no GM at all? And so again, to me, I believe it is better to have GM that does something here, something there, saves a lot of money and keeps alive and stays competitive that way, than to not have it at all. So just keep that in mind. And then obviously competition increases big time. So obviously Mexican companies now compete with American companies for the consumers. And so as a result, competition makes it not only tougher for them to survive, but also forces them to be more innovative, invest more in research, development, be better, be more efficient. And obviously, again, if you believe in competition, and hopefully you do, then that's a good process. And finally, obviously, the volume makes it better. So companies become more specialized, produce more of things. And don't forget that, for example, the big three now sell huge volumes of cars, not only in Mexico, but in the rest of Latin America. And by the way, most of the cars made in Mexico by GM, by Ford, by Chrysler are actually going for the Latin American market, not back to the United States. So, but by increasing the volume big time, they actually decrease substantially the marginal cost. And when they do, again, they become more competitive, prices fall, everyone seems to win in this case. Now, so why do we hear so much about losses and virtually nothing about the gains? Well, it is human propensity to first be more concerned about losses than about gains. We would go much further to prevent losses than to have gains. And so, as I said before, it is very likely that we would see a person on the street with a sign that says NAFTA kills jobs but it is very unlikely to see a person on the street that says, I saved $5,000 in my Mexican-made Chevy Silverado. And so both are important economic effects, and it's not clear which one is actually stronger, because savings of $5,000 in the Chevy Silverado means that that $5,000 goes toward another probably American job. And so this would be very likely, but this would be not very likely to see on the street. And sometimes this may create an impression that this is the only consequence of regional integration, when in reality it's not, definitely not. Now, a couple of things. My master's was in economics, but I specialized in public policy analysis. And so if I may, I would like to spend a few minutes talking about what that means and what needs to be done. The problem is that many people, when we talk about regional integration, they see the problem, and I see the problem too. I mean, trade deficit is bad. It is bad that America sells less to China than China sells to America. It is bad that America sells less to Mexico than Mexico sells to America. It is bad that America is not doing as well as we would like it to do. But, and this is a huge, huge but, the question is what needs to be done about it. And the problem is that many people advocate for building a fence basically around the United States and trying to solve the problem by restricting trade. There was a beautiful time once in the 50s, in the 60s, and the 70s when America was so far ahead of everybody else that everybody else couldn't even think about competing with America. The most advanced technology at that time in China or Mexico was probably a shovel and a hammer, when the United States already was experimenting with computers and sending people to the moon. So those were probably wonderful times. The thing is that they're not coming back. The thing is, as Carol Lewis said, in these days you have to run really fast just to be where you are. Think about it. Just to be where you are, you have to run really fast. The thing is that the reason some other countries are doing well and maybe even better than the United States is not because the United States is doing something wrong, it's because those countries are catching up. Just because the United States was better off or more advanced than, for example, China was 20 years ago doesn't mean that it's going to be the case 20 years from now. And restricting trade with, for example, China or Mexico is not going to solve the problem. It's just going to isolate the United States. We know that what definitely will happen in that case is that prices will rise. Have no doubt that once trade with China will be restricted or trade with Mexico will be restricted, prices will go up right away. I mean, this is clear, logical, and undisputable. You will also have fewer choices as a consumer. The resources will not be allocated optimally because, labor resources, natural resources, production facilities, obviously, again, there will be restrictions and they will not be located where the economy says they should be, but where the, political and legal systems allow them to be. And then obviously companies will be less competitive. So the right ways to deal with that problem is not to build a fence, but to try to remain better than others through education, through training, through more innovation, better quality, efficiency, higher productivity, better service, all those things that America have been doing better than others for who knows how long now, and hopefully will continue doing better for who knows for how long. So maybe also American government should try to promote American products or help promote American products in China, in Mexico, whatever other countries we have trade deficit with. But again, not building a fence. Let me give you a picture here. Yes, so those who advocate solving the problem with the fence and pretending that it's still the 60s and the other countries don't have any technologies and basically putting your head in the sand and pretending that nothing can change, those people just lie to themselves. Import tariffs, trade barriers, those things will not solve the problem. Those things may make the United States next North Korea or Cuba. And yes, the trade deficit obviously in those countries is, it's pretty much non-existent, the trade, but it's not negative. They don't have any trade deficit. But are they better off? So the only way to solve the problem is, I would say, through innovation, through science, through better economic climate, through climate that fosters innovation, company creation, better tax system, lower taxes perhaps for companies. This is how you solve the problem, not as I said, not through more barriers. I have a couple stories here about the things that I discussed, but I'm not going to get into the details. You can read them. The brief story is that the reason America today seems to be doing not as well as it did before is not because of that international trade, not because globalization. It's because the other countries are developing. And again, if you want to be number one, remain number one, you need to run really, really, really fast. Simply staying where you are is not enough anymore. So you have to run just to stay where you are. And so the same thing, for example, applies. I talked about American Big Three, but for example, Europeans often complain that Volkswagen has more and more factories overseas, notably in Spain and Czech Republic. Well, the thing is that Volkswagen sells most of its cars outside Germany. And one of the reasons it's so successful at gaining market share is because it has access to all those cheap labor pools. And if it didn't, what would have happened is not more jobs in Germany at Volkswagen, but it would be just fewer jobs at Volkswagen in general. And that's exactly the same the same would be true about many industries in the United States. More barriers, bigger fences between, for example, the United States and Mexico or China would not create more jobs in the United States. What they would do is they would just lead to losses in jobs on both sides of the border, less consumption, less trade, higher prices, and it will not solve anything. It will just set us back in time. If I were to make a prediction, I would say though that the United States is much better positioned to win this war or competition than any other country. The United States still has more money than everybody else, still has better education than anybody else. And I guess that's them who should be worried, not the United States. Obviously, that's provided that the United States continue doing what it does best. Innovation, education, immigration, attracting the brightest and the smartest from all around the world, those kinds of things, and not by building fences and imposing import tariffs. In the 50s, parents would tell to their parents, eat your dinner. There are children starving in China and India. Today, what parents should be saying to their children is that be sure to finish your homework, because there are children in China and India who are working on their homework. And if you won't finish your homework, they will take your job. So this is true, and this is uncomfortable, and maybe we even wish those countries were not here to compete with us, though I know that it's actually better when they are here to compete with us. But like it or not, this is what's happening, and the only way you can stay ahead of the game is if you study harder. There is the stereotype that China is good at math, and India is good at science, and America is good, well, as you see here on the picture, at listening to iPods. I don't think this is true. I've been to all these countries and many more, and I know that the United States is still definitely number one in many of these areas, in fact probably in all of these areas. But again, the other countries are catching up very fast, and you gotta run very fast to stay where you are. Now, America's advantages are huge capital and many new industries. Much of innovation requires capital, and you not only have more money, but you also have very efficient financial markets that allow people or entrepreneurs access those financial resources. You definitely have very strong education system, particularly college level and post-secondary education. A huge advantage here is that you have very stable, very developed functioning political system, though now with the war going on between the Democrats and conservatives, some people doubt it. But believe me, your system is much better than what other developing countries have. You have very nurturing economic environment. Creating companies is easy, operating companies is easy, and yes, I wish tax system was simpler, I wish taxes were lower, but overall your economic environment is much more nurturing than what you would see in other countries. Americans have entrepreneurial spirit. It seems to be part of the kind of mental schema in the United States. You have wonderfully developed economic networks and clusters, production clusters, and that's a huge advantage. Developing countries are only developing those capabilities. And you have a very high rate of technology adoption. I mean, internet, computers, iPods, you are the first ones to ride that wave. The problem, obviously, is that in the United States, basic education, particularly elementary school, secondary school, high school, is not as strong as it should be. It's still better than in most countries, but not as good as, for example, what you would see in Japan or Singapore or Northern Europe. Huge funds, I would say, are spent not where they should be spent, so bailout packages and stimulus packages are generally not bad, but only when that money goes to stimulate the economy as development. When the money goes towards social security or paying interests on your loans, that's not development. And unfortunately, a huge portion of the American budget goes towards servicing loans and paying social security, as well as much of the targeted expenses are going more towards handouts rather than development, and so that I see as a problem. Exceptionally strong interest groups in the United States, like for example, the Wall Street is extremely strong and has been successfully able to, for example, get funds from the government. So sometimes it seems to me that some companies get too comfortable with the government, and if it goes in that direction, it may potentially lead to problems down the road. There is also, in my opinion, and that is a problem in my opinion, there is a huge emphasis on the financial sector. Less so in the last 3 years following the economic crisis, but it was definitely the case beforehand. The brightest minds and the greatest resources were going and settling on Wall Street and not in the Silicon Valley. And so more engineers probably are needed for America now. Engineers are more needed now than financiers, though again, I suppose finance is extremely important and luckily it functions well in the United States, but again, lawyers probably don't do as much for the economy as engineers do or economists do, and unfortunately the brightest would be going into law or finance, and not so many of them would be going into engineering and basic science. And then obviously increasing government debt, spendings and taxes are a problem, but again, from what I see, it's not as bad, nearly as bad as it is in most other countries, and definitely there are ways out still. Now here is your next question, and obviously the correct answer is A. It is controversial, but most studies show that jobs are created in all parts of the Union due to regional integration. Now, your take-home assignment is your usual assignment. What if Canada and the United States became one country? And you would have to explain or predict what effect that would have on prices, volume of trade, employment, production, wealth, consumption, wages, all those kinds of things. I told you that it would be very smart not to think about Canada and the United States, but think about, for example, Japan and Germany, for example, becoming one country. What would happen then? When you think about the United States, you all of a sudden become more emotional, and actually if you had that EEG on your head, it would even show that you think with a different part of your brain when you think about your own country. And so that's an important thing, and so keep that in mind. Now, I have a bunch of slides here about all kinds of regional blocks and trading blocks of the world. This is not going to be on the exam. It's only for you in case you're interested and want to learn more. The book has about 40 pages about all these different trading blocks and unions. So if you're interested, you can watch it, read it. I'll include also a video about the European Union, about 10 minutes, very interesting video. You can watch that too. But again, that would not be on the exam. What will be on the exam is this stuff, and I hope you will find time to learn for it. And I promise there will be nothing on the exam that is not listed on this slide. Thank you very much, and good luck with your take-home assignment.